Hey there, it's Rick here from the CAD Jury School, and today I just wanted to cover a number of tips and steps in Maverick Studio Render, especially for those of you that are using either Matrix or Matrix Gold or even just straight out Rhino. And just wanted to show you how you can actually go about importing a 3DM file and very easily applying materials and producing a render. So let's get started. The first thing that you'll need to do is come into your preferences here. And what you want to do is just make sure that your settings are set up here under navigation mode to McNeil Rhinoceros. Okay. The software supports, menuing and moving around, zooming in and panning, etc., using a number of shortcuts and keys that are familiar with people from various different programs. So obviously, being Rhino users, you want to use McNeil Rhinoceros as your preference there. So just make sure that you set that there. The other thing that you might want to just check is your hardware. So you can see on my desktop here, I'm using a GTX 1080 Ti graphics card. It's a couple generations old now. So the new 3000 series are released. So if you can get your hands on one of those at the moment, that's a fantastic card, a lot quicker than this card that I've got in my machine. Of course, if you're running a notebook computer, you're going to be running a much slower graphics card, and just be aware that your rendering speeds and overall performance will be slower because of the performance of your video card. I'm just going to hit OK here. Now, the other thing that I might suggest too is with the materials here, you can set them up so that you can actually toggle the name of the material here. So that's handy, especially when you're getting started. I think it saves you having to mouse over the material to see the name of it. So you can set that up if you like. Otherwise, just toggle it off and see the straight materials there. So I'm just going to go over to Matrix Gold, and the document I've got open here, we'll send that across to Maverick. So as I explained in the previous video, you just simply have to click this little paper aeroplane here in the toolbar, and that will send it across to Maverick. Just wait a few moments whilst that goes across. And here's our drawing with pretty much the viewport that we had open, at least the position of the camera and stuff like that. You'll see over on the left hand side here, as I explained previously, that it does see any layers where you've got materials or objects in those layers. So any other layers are ignored. So these two layers came across. So if I select metal, you'll see that it's highlighted here in the viewport. And just make sure you're across in the library tab and under shading here, and it will give you a list of different materials and folders here. So if I come to the metal folder, I can click on polished and I can select a material from here. So let's go for 18 karat rose gold. I can just simply right click on the material and apply it to my selection. Now let's do the same thing with some gemstones. So I'll select the gems, and you can see over here in the viewport they're all selected, and I can come to gemstone here and select, say, a diamond, and I can right click and apply to selection. You can also drag and drop materials. So if I was to select one stone here, let's say this gemstone here, I could drag and drop onto that, select that and apply a diamond again. We'll reuse the same material that we applied previously, which was the diamond, and I'll just click OK here. So the next thing to look at is an environment for our scene. So we can come over to lighting, and you can see here we've got these different ambiances, and I recommend for jewelry applications, you use one of the studio environments, and you can click to see a preview of the different lighting environments. So what I usually use is one of the ones here, and it's actually this one, Studio White SCB. So it's in the Studio folder under White SC, and it's the second one at the list. you can just simply click and drag it and drop it onto a blank area in your scene. And that applies not only some default lights, but also applies a basic white ground plane. So you can see there's slight shadowing underneath the ground plane, underneath the ring there. Now the lighting in the scene's a little bit too bright, and this is a great application to show you the power of Maverick Render and its light mixer. So if we come over to the light mixer tab here and click on that, it's currently not enabled, so I can power that on to enable it. And you can see here that we've got 4 different lighting channels: a light back, a light left, a light right, and a light top. So it's set up like a real photo studio, like if you had a photo studio box, and we can control the intensity and strength of the lights, and we can see it in real time in this preview window. So to have a quick look at a light, or what light you're affecting, you can mute a light, which will switch off that light temporarily or switch it back, and you can adjust the power of it or intensity. I don't suggest increasing these past 1. I suggest dropping them down a little bit, and you can make your way through each of the lights by muting it and seeing which light that is. So that's the left light, and I can see it's a little bit too bright over here, so I'm just going to reduce its intensity a bit as well, a little bit too much. And let's look at the right light. So I can mute it temporarily, and again I can control its output or brightness. And here's the one at the top, and I can again reduce its intensity a little bit, and basically play around with those till you get a setting that you like in your viewport here. And once you've done that, I suggest that you just disable the light mixer just to switch that off. It will give you an increase in performance. It will ask to consolidate the changes, so we just say yes here, and it will start recalculating that render. The next thing to look at is changing our ground plane. So if we come over to the library tab and we come over to shading here, you'll see that there's a number of different materials in here. Now, ones I like to use generally are leather or marble, so let's just try marble for the moment. We'll click the tab here, and there are a number of different marble options. Let's choose something maybe fairly light against this. So I'll choose this marble A light grey, and we simply drag it onto the ground plane, and that will apply that for us straight away. Now, to navigate around your model, it's like Rhino or in Matrix. You can hold your right mouse button to rotate your view, and you can use your scroll wheel on your mouse to zoom in or zoom out of a scene. If you hold down your shift button and use your right button, you can pan the view. So same sort of operation as you'd be used to from using your CAD software. Let me just lay this out a bit better. Okay, the next thing we'll have a look at is different camera angles. Now, if you come up here, you can see there are 2 cameras set at the moment, Maverick camera and view perspective. Now, we're currently in a view called view perspective, okay? And I can move around in that view, but it's not saved until I save the viewport here. So you'll see here a little save button. I can click that to store that viewport and save that. And that way, if I move to another view, like this one, if I want to switch back to my view perspective, it will be set to the camera position that I previously had. So the great thing is we can add multiple viewports. What we can do is click the little camera button here to say new camera. And if we wanted to, we can rename it over here. So it's called Perspective 001. You can come in here and change that if you wish, but I'll just leave it as it is. And we can reset our viewport, to another view. And if I click the save to store that viewport, it will store that for this document, okay? So you can easily switch back to different views and go back to a stored viewport. Okay, so you might want to save one for, let's say, a top view, or one from a side view or something, and maybe have 3 or 4 stored viewports there. But just remember that when you move your camera holding your right mouse button, okay, that's just changing it temporarily. It's not going to actually save that viewport. If you want to save that view, you need to click the Store Viewport button. The other thing I've just realized is my prongs aren't the same as my base material metal there, so let me just fix that up. If I just minimize this layer, there's another layer here called Object. Let me just select that. Yeah, that's all the prongs. So let's just, it's a good exercise. Let's come back to our materials library here. We'll come to jewelry. We'll come to metal and polished, and we'll again use rose gold. Now previously I said you can right click to select and apply a material. You can obviously also just drag and drop it into your scene. What will happen is Maverick will detect that and say, what do you want? Do you want to select a particular object you've clicked on, or the items that are selected? So I want to click on the selection and click OK. It will ask me if I want to reuse the material, because it knows I've used that material already in my drawing, so I can click reuse and just click on my viewport to deselect them. So that looks a lot better. Now we will have a look at fixing up the diamonds here, because in my case the diamonds, the seats are too small. They're actually overlapping with the actual gemstones. So I'll show you a neat quick trick in Maverick to fix that. But just before we do that, I just want to talk about depth of field. Now depth of field is a way to add realism to your scene by keeping areas in focus and other areas out of focus. So it allows you to, you know, basically focus on a specific area of your design. So maybe a background area or the back of a ring band might not be so important. So it adds a lot of realism to your photo, because it simulates what you would expect with a camera and with certain lenses and depth of field settings on a standard camera. Now, for those of you running Matrix Gold, there is a tool in Matrix Gold to do that. There also is a post-processing tool to do that after you've created a render, but it's honestly not as realistic, and you'll see that if you compare renders from both Maverick and straight out of Matrix Gold. So let's have a look at it. It's pretty easy to set up. The first thing we do is, if you just right click on your main center screen there, you want to disable this global depth of field and click OK, and you'll see suddenly it goes all out of focus. Now what we can do is right click again on the image, and we can set this to autofocus, and it'll bring that area into focus. Now by default the focus area and the depth of field is very, very shallow, so we get just a very small area that's in focus, but we can easily change that. So we're currently in the Perspective 01 camera, so if we click on that here in our objects list, you can see here we've got aperture, and aperture is the opening, if you like, of the camera lens, and that controls the amount of light coming in and controls the depth of field. So we can lock the exposure setting, just clicking this little padlock here, and if we increase our aperture, we'll increase the area that's in focus, okay? And you can see that again quite dynamically adjusted as I adjust that slider. So I don't know, somewhere maybe about here looks okay to me. You know, you can adjust that to your settings and what you think looks right. And you can see immediately that adds a bit of realism to our image, and it'll get progressively better as obviously it starts to render out. So let's have a look at fixing up these diamonds. We can do that using what's called trace sets, and to do that we first have to set up a couple of things. So if we come to our metal object here, you should have this option here for trace sets, okay? And what we want to set is an ID for this metal, and we'll call it ID number 2, okay? And We'll also pick our prongs, okay, because they're a separate layer here, and we'll give that a trace set ID of number 3, okay. So the metals, the main part of the ring is trace set ID 2, and the prongs are trace set ID 3. Now, if we come to the gems, they're currently set to trace set ID number 1, okay. So what we're going to do is, if we come over to our materials tab and come down to diamond, you'll see an option here for trace sets. So just click the plus symbol there. If you can't see that, you might have to click here to display that. If it says reveal extended roll-ups, just click on that to display that. And here under trace sets for our diamond, we want to exclude a list of numbers, which is going to be 2, 3, and just press enter. Now what you'll see immediately happen is the stones, if I just click on the grid here on the background, you'll see the stones don't have the interaction now with the metal. As I say, in this particular model, my gem seats were way too small. They were designed for a production environment, for casting purposes and for finishing, not for rendering. So the stones were actually overlapping the metal, and that causes that sort of interaction of light. So using trace sets is a way to avoid that. Okay, if we're fairly happy with our scene, let's go and set up some rendering. So we'll come to the render tab here over on the right hand side, and you've got a number of different options here. So the first thing is the resolution. So I recommend that if you're emailing something to a client or to a customer, there's no need to go anywhere larger than 800 by 600. If you are wanting to make something, let's say for social media, or maybe uploading to your website, or something a bit neater, you might want to come and set a higher resolution. And 1920 by 1080 full HD is probably as high as you'd need to go. The other thing you can change is the sampling rate. Now the target sampling rate's very, very high. The more samples, the longer it takes to render. So if you've got a very fast recent video card, then sure, you can leave that at 12. I recommend for speed, you can probably drop that down to about 9.5 or 10 will be more than adequate. And the other important thing to switch on is the denoiser. So we'll switch that on. And the other thing is the output. So where is this going to be saved? So you've got the option to select a folder, and you can change your file name here. So, we could call this chainring render 01. The file format, so I'm just going to choose JPEG here, but all the common sort of file formats are supported, even very high resolution, large format TIFF files. So we'll just pick JPEG 8-bit, and that's basically it. So when we click Final Render, it will open up my render window, and I can scroll out of that window actually. Let's see the full view. And you can see it's starting to render. Now, as I say, I've got an older series NVIDIA card. It's a 1080 Ti. It was a great card in its day, but if you've got a notebook or laptop, or even a desktop from the last probably 3 years, find that you'll have a better video card in there. But it rendered out pretty quickly, and I can zoom in and have a look at that. It gives me some basic information about how far I've zoomed in, and that's basically it. So we'll click OK there. Now, at any time, if you want to change your focal area, if you want to put focus onto this area, I can just right click and click autofocus again. We'll start rendering that scene out. And if I want to render a separate rendering, just make sure that you change the file name here, because otherwise it will override your old one. So I'll change this to 02. And again, can click Final Render. and start my render process. For those of you who are going to be rendering something for uploading to Facebook or to email to us for the 20-day challenge, I recommend setting your custom dimensions here to 1920 by 1080 full HD. Okay. And just click Final Render. And in this window, we can zoom out a bit. See this render get progressively better, but it's going to take a few moments on my computer, so I'll cancel that in a moment. Yes, stop without saving. So look, that's a quick overview of Maverick Render. Hopefully that gives you a chance to get started with a few renderings of your own, and would love to see some of your sample renders and work. You know, feel free to send that through to us. It would be great. Okay, that's it. Hopefully that gives you enough to just get you started and trying out a few things. I recommend you go to the Maverick YouTube page and check out some of their tutorial videos. A lot of them are product based, so they're not necessarily jewelry specific, but you'll certainly glean a lot of information from those to push your rendering even further. And for now, just, you know, as I say, have a play around and experiment with different things. Try some different materials and try also some different ground planes and things like that and see how you go. All right, that's it for now. We'll see you later.